Good day, everyone. So today we're going to look at some tips, starter tips for passing the NCLEX now. And this tip is for my NCLEX RN takers. And even if you're taking the NCLEX PN, the information I have for you today will be helpful. But the NCLEX RN, some of the categories are a little bit different on what you're going to be tested. So most importantly, know your exam. Know what you're going to be tested on. Understand the types of questions and how those questions can be presented. And the best way to know that is to practice questions. Practice, practice, practice. Now, I do get a lot of clients who practice tutoring and practice questions, and they come to me for tutoring, and they tell me that, I've done hundreds of these questions, and I still was not able to get to the right answer, or I still was unable to pass. So what you can do is, number one, if you're a nursing student, make sure you pay attention and you take note of the things you need to be learning and studying that go along with the NCSBN test plan for NCLEX. Because if you make it through school and you're unable to pass the exam, then this is where many people get stuck, right? They spent these years, months, weeks studying, passing school, and have a hard time passing the NCLEX exam. So be sure you're paying attention to that. So what we're going to do, this is the NCSBN test plan. This is the 8 categories for the NCLEX RN. The differences in the NCLEX RN and PN is the percentages are a little bit different in the categories that you will be tested in. And also the NCLEX RN has this category, management of care, because we're kind of the managers, we're kind of the leader of the care, right? Everybody comes to the nurse, to the RN, to be updated, to find out how the patient is doing. So we're the manager, we're the management, we're dealing with management of the care of the patient. This is 20% of the exam. In the NCLEX PN exam, that category is coordinated care, because you're going to coordinate the care of the patient with the assistance of the RN. So you don't really manage the care, you're coordinating with the RN to care for that patient. So those are the differences. So I want you to focus on passing the NCLEX. If you need assistance with tutoring, you can reach out to me. I'll leave information of how you can contact me. But each day, or maybe each week, we'll see how this goes. I'm going to try to give you some little tips. So today's tip is going to come from management of care. And this is the outline per the NCSBN test plan. This is the short version of the outline, but pull it up, look at it. I know it's very long, very lengthy, but it's very important information. It tells you all the things that you'll need to know, and it is generalized, it is vague. They don't give you very specifics, but in the more detailed part, as you read further down, you'll get more detailed information on the types of questions that you might see, what they're looking for, what they're expecting you to know. So the first thing we look at here, and remember this is 20% up to an average of 20% of the exam. So if you received, let's say the test gives you 100 questions, then you could potentially get 20 questions in management of care. All right, and it's all about the minimal standard. The minimal standard. I've had clients that ask me, do I have to make above passing in all the categories? You do, because they want to know that you understand the minimal standard of care for each of those categories. So for management of care, it's an average of 17 to 23%, with the median range about 20%. So in the average, 20 questions is what you can get, around that amount, anywhere from 17 to 23 if you had 100 questions. All right. The minimal standards include performing and directing activities that manage the patient's care. This is the description of what management of care is. All right. What are those activities that we're directing? The provision of care, within the legal scope of practice. So we have to know what is our legal scope of practice as an RN to direct certain activities. All right, we have to be able to practice in a manner that is consistent with the code of ethics for an RN, for RNs. So go back and review under your fundamentals, your ethics, and your code of ethics for the nurse, for the RN. Client rights. We have to be able to practice in a manner that is consistent with client rights. Patients have rights, their confidentiality, and protecting their confidentiality. So here is practice and be an advocate, not only for cost-effective care, but to update the client plan of care. And down here we have management, client confidentiality, and privacy. Establish priorities. So you will get a lot of prioritization questions that are under or within the management of care category. Ethical practice, right? So that goes back to our ethics, legal rights and responsibilities, collaboration with an interdisciplinary team. So we have to be able to work with other members of the healthcare team. All right, and that is listed within here, and also manage conflict among clients and healthcare staff. Quality improvement. We want to be able to manage the care of patients, but also improve the quality. And that can be participate in performance improvement projects and quality improvement processes. We have to know when we should refer a patient to another discipline like social worker, case management, speech therapy, physical therapy, and what discipline is appropriate, what department is going to be appropriate for that patient. Resource management, how to manage our resources, how to make sure that a patient received an informed consent, and was the informed consent properly signed? Did the patient know and understand what they're signing? And what we do as a nurse, our what's within our scope of practice is to make sure that that information was informed and that we're there to sign as a witness to the consent. Staff education. Sometimes we have to make sure if we see that someone doesn't understand or know something that we educate ourselves and that we educate other staff, even if it's just a simple word of, take them to the side and let them know this is what you should do. And also being able to supervise. So if you see something, you say something, right? So supervision. So those are all the things that a general overall outlook of what a nurse, even an entry-level nurse, may experience or may see within that first few months of practice. So we're going to look at the first bullet, and I always tell people, look at these outlines and look to see if there's something you're unfamiliar with. Look to see if there's something you haven't seen, and go back and use a good resource. I like the Saunders Comprehensive Review. I go back and I look at that information. Use your index to look up advanced directives, living will, look up that information and review what you may have forgotten. What is the difference in these different advanced directives? So that's something you would want to do. The other thing with tutoring, you get to learn a little bit more of how to use your test taking strategies, key test taking strategies. And a lot of the textbooks, a lot of the Q banks don't really teach you strategies. They just provide information. They just tell you why an answer is right or wrong. What's the rationale? So that's what we're going to look at as we approach some of these questions. All right, so we want to focus on passing. Let's look at a question. Now, a question, Nclex questions will have parts, right? There's always parts of a question. So this is key test taking information. First, you want to focus on the data in the question. So as you read the question, focus on the data. You're going to read every word and not just read it, but you want to process what you're reading. Okay, sometimes we read without understanding. So here, when you're actually reading Nclex questions, you have to read to understand. Pay attention to the words. Read every word. Make a decision about what the question is asking. So let's do that now. A nurse is precepting a graduate nurse on the oncology unit. The nurse notes a copy of a living will in the client's chart and asks the graduate nurse to define the meaning of the document. What document? The meaning of the document, the living will. So the question now comes next. So we know we have a nurse who's educating and precepting a graduate nurse. They're only in an oncology unit. She looks in the patient's chart. There's a living will, and she's asking the graduate nurse, tell me what is a living will? What does this mean that this patient has a living will on their chart? All right, that's our scenario. Which statement by the graduate nurse correctly defines a living will? So they're basically telling me choose the answer down here between A, B, C, and D that correctly states what a living will is. So this is a positive question. We've identified that, meaning it's a positive, meaning we're looking for a true or correct statement. It's giving us true or correct information. We're not looking for a negative. If it had said which statement says that the graduate nurse needs further teaching or they don't understand what a living will is, then we would be selecting the negative. Okay, so here we're going to choose a positive answer. All right, so we noted the subject. The subject is a living will. What is a living will? That's our question. And we determine what content is being tested. They're testing us on what is a living will. Now we're going to visualize the event. Not very much to visualize, but we know that patients will have a living will on their chart. What does that mean? So sometimes you have to visualize the information. When have you talked about it? When did you read about it? So sometimes you are visualizing maybe your note card that you wrote that information on. Maybe you wrote it in pretty colors and made it brightly outlined or something. Sometimes visualizing where I've read something does help. But a lot of times with this, because this is more subject based, you don't always have a procedure or something to think it through. Okay, so this is more subject based, but if it's appropriate, you would visualize the event. All right, and you hear my music going on in the background. That's the ambient music to study and concentrate. So put on some concentrating music when you're studying. All right, so we're looking for strategic words. Really not very many strategic words in here. It's basically what they're asking us, which is what is a living will and which option correctly defines a living will. But if there were strategic words, those words would make a difference in determining what the question is asking. So if you don't understand how to read the question, you're going to have a hard time answering even simple questions. So you got to break it down. And this takes practice. It does take practice because we don't always read to understand or read to define. Sometimes we just gather information and we can tell you a story, but we may not be able to tell you what does it mean. Okay? So we determine whether the question presents a positive or negative query event. That's our next step, which we did that. We determined it's a positive. So I know I'm looking for something true, something correct. Now, we're going to avoid asking what if. No what ifs. So if you find yourself saying, well, it might mean this and that, then scratch it. What they say, delete that from the record. You're not going to read into it. So if you find yourself saying what if, that's going to lead you to reading into the question and choosing the incorrect answer. So you want to stay focused, stay on task. All right, now we're going to look at our options. Always use the process of elimination when choices or options are presented, and you want to read each option carefully. Once you have eliminated the options, then you're going to go back and reread the question before you select your final choice or choices. So this is a typical question where I would pool answers in my mind, and I would think of what is a living will. So you can answer this in your head before you read the options very quickly. So you can pool answers. Some questions you can do this because this will keep you focused. It'll help you build your confidence while you're taking the exam. You're going to say, oh yes, I know what a living will is. I remember reading that. I know what that is. It helps if I read through that living will, it's going to tell me what that patient wants. All right, what the patient wants to be done. to them. All right, and it can state that out specifically for healthcare, and it tells what to do, what not to do, should if they can't tell me. All right, what to do, what not to do if they can't tell me. So that I pulled my answer in my head because that's just my general, really quick information about a living will. So if you've ever made notes on a living will, that's a pretty simple way to write it. You're going to write your notes in a way that you can simplify it and you understand it, right? And that it's in your words. So that's what I remember. I pulled my answer in my head. Now I'm going to look for how to eliminate these options. I'm going to choose things that are incorrect. They don't sound right. I might look for comparable or alike options. Those are things that I would eliminate. Anything with a closed-ended word, an absolute word, if that's present, those options are likely incorrect. So closed-ended words, you're going to eliminate those options. A closed-ended word is like an absolute. I call them extreme words. They're not always options that are true, that are incorrect. Depends on what the question's asking. But many times when you see that, it's like an all or none. And a lot of times that's not true. It's like, I can only go to this place. I can only do this. Well, that's probably not true. I could change it up and do something else. So any word that's like only, all the time, always, any, do anything, it's just really not specific, and it's just including everything, or that they can never do something. Oh, never, extremely. Sometimes I just see the word extremely. Be extremely cautious. That might sound kind of over the top, overboard. So I'm careful about choosing those types of options. Sometimes when you look through the options, you might find one or two of them that might seem very similar, and you're having a hard time choosing which one. In that case, look to see if there is an umbrella option. The umbrella option, or something that encompasses, it might include all the other options. The umbrella option is like the overall. I had a client that told me it was more complete. It included that everything else. Okay, overall includes everything else. Comparable. I mentioned that earlier. I forgot to write that down. Comparable and alike options, you're usually going to eliminate. So you might have an option that tells you something, states something, and then you read another option and it's very similar to the other option. You're probably going to eliminate those two options. So that might get you down to two. All right. If it's a prioritization question, we'll get into that. That's when you're going to use ABCs, Maslow's, or the nursing process. If they're asking you what is your nursing response, you're going to use therapeutic communication. If you're trying to delegate or do an assignment, you're going to use guidelines that match the patient's needs and the scope of practice of the person you're delegating to. If it's a form question, you're going to use guidelines to select the correct option of the question, or options that address a medication. Form guidelines. So those are just general information, what we normally do. Like, we never really tell a person to stop taking your medicine abruptly. Things that are within our scope of practice. We don't change the dose. Things like that I would eliminate. All right, so we're not dealing with those today. This question, we may not really find a good testing strategy because this is more subject based. All right, so we have to kind of focus on the subject. And our subject here is living will. Now, if I just think about this word living, this means the patient, if somebody's living, they're alive, right? The patient is still alive and they have a will. So if we think about a will for an estate, which is already when a person has passed on, it tells you what to do with their property, with their belongings. Give this to this person, give this to that person. That's a will for a person's estate. So when you think of a living will, you're going to focus now on, okay, the person's alive and a will tells you what to do. So this is going to tell me what to do with their life. So that's how you're breaking down the word. If you forget what a living will is, it's living, they're living, and it's a will. It's telling you what to do with something. So it's telling me what to do with their living, with their life. Okay. So if I forgot, I'm just going to use that term, that word, and think of what does those words mean. All right, and just break it down into simplicity. So now we're going to go through our options. A, it is a legal document that expresses our patient's wishes. Okay, that is saying, it's telling me what the patient wants to be done, and it is telling me what to do with their life. Okay, what wishes for medical treatment. Okay, that makes sense. When they can no longer make those decisions themselves. So yes, a living will, they're still alive, but because they can't voice what to do, we have to use this living will so they can tell me, so it can tell me what to do, because they are unable to tell me. So this sounds pretty good. I'm going to keep this option for now, and we're going to move on to the next. The document legally appoints another person to make decisions for our patient. So living will just tells you what to do with their self, their person, their life. All right, to make medical decisions. So does it really appoint somebody to tell, does it tell us what person needs to make the decisions? All right, for our patients should they become unable to do so. So not really with a living will. This is a durable power of attorney or a healthcare proxy. All right, so they're both legal documents, but the living will does not appoint the person. It just tells what to do with their life. All right, so I can get rid of this. I'm pretty confident that that's not a very good answer. And if you didn't want to mark it out right away, you want to go through all of them, that's okay. But you're going to put yourself some kind of mark to know, or some kind of legal mental note to say B. I don't think B is it. The information in the guideline, or the information in the document, is a guideline for medical treatment. All right, a guideline for medical treatment. That's true. I said that it tells what the patient wants to be done to them for health care if they can't tell me. So that part is true. Now, anytime you see but, and, all those conjuncting words that join one thought to another thought, be careful. Make sure the first thought is also true with the second thought. So the first part of this is true. Is the second part true? The information in the document can be overridden by a provider's prescription. This is a legal document. A living will is legal. So no, it cannot be overridden by a provider's prescription. So I would eliminate that, because part two, the second part, is not correct. Medical decisions outlined in the document are the patient's wishes. Okay, that part is true. Now we have another but do not protect the healthcare providers from liability. So this is saying, if I do what this document tells me to do, what the patient's wishes are, and I just allow natural death, if they said they wanted to not have life-sustaining apparatuses, does that make me liable for allowing them to die? If I didn't code them, does it protect me from liability, or does it not? Well, if it's a legal document and we're doing what they said they want to be done, yes, it will protect us from liability. We're not liable because we're doing what the patient stated they wanted. So this do not protect is incorrect. So I'm comfortable with saying that A is the answer. A is the answer. All right, I hope this helped with breaking down questions. Remember your living will. Again, there are a couple things with the living will. Advanced directives. So let's just think about advanced directives. On admission to a healthcare facility, the patient is usually going to be asked, do they have an advance directive? And if one does exist, it must be documented and included as part of the medical record. If the patient signs an advance directive at the time of admission, it must be documented in the patient's medical record. This comes from Saunders, chapter 6. All right, on ethical and legal issues. The two basic types of advance directives include instructional directives and durable power of attorney. So the living will is kind of instructional. It tells you what to do. It tells you what medical treatment that the patient chooses to omit or refuse if the client becomes unable to make decisions and is terminally ill. The durable power of attorney, on the other hand, for healthcare, appoints a person, maybe this healthcare proxy, chosen by the patient to make healthcare decisions on the patient's behalf when the client can no longer make those decisions. So it's not something that is not protecting us because we're doing what the patient wanted to do. So if they code it on us, it is a legal document, and it does state, the living will does state a patient's medical care preferences. The power of attorney, durable power of attorney, states who can make those decisions. All right, I hope this has helped you today. We'll look at more management of care or more topics, more questions within our NCSBN test plan. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you've enjoyed it. Have a blessed day. Thank you.